Mark Zeman built an incredible software company in SpeedCurve. Slightly unorthodox, this was bootstrapped, remarkably profitable, and he had some really interesting philosophies along the way.
There were actually plenty of times that we said no to customers, that we said, hey, we're not the right fit for you. We had no marketing strategy, we did nothing paid. We did absolutely nothing except build community and participate in that community.
Continuing the unorthodox flavour, around 12 months into the journey, Mark took on a business partner. Ordinarily, that involves heavy negotiation and documentation, but not in this instance.
I was a 100% shareholder throughout the entire business, so Steve just trusted me that, he would get kind of half of it in the end.
Then there's the rare beauty of a profit-producing business.
In the end, Steve and I took the profit out of the business, and so it really became a cash machine very quickly.
Some of the secrets, therefore, that enabled them to create this incredible business.
Over time, everyone had been there so long, like no one ever left SpeedCurve, so no one ever left in that 13 years that we ran. I'm really proud of the fact that pretty much everyone at SpeedCurve has said that this is the best job they've ever had. It was certainly the best job I've ever had.
Inevitably, all businesses are faced with challenges.
Essentially, we were the wrong shape to deal with a different market. And so in that 12, 15 years, kind of the market had changed and we were no longer the right shape. And so what do we do?
Then post-acquisition, Mark discovered that perhaps there was an opportunity with his business that he hadn't yet realised.
It's amazing working with Embrace now to see the sales teams in action, and they are going and turning, what were 20K a year plans for us that we were like, hey, we're doing all right. This is a good plan. They're talking to the right people. They're turning those into.
Mark Zeman, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. So you were the co-founder of a company called SpeedCurve, and that to me sounds like it could be a 1980s video game, perhaps coming into the digital era. Did you get mistaken for identity kind of confusion along the way there with the business?
No, we didn't actually.
Right. Am I the first person to say that?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a pretty niche kind of area, so that we ended up in, and so people just went, great, SpeedCurve makes sense. You're about charts, you're about data. I was surprised that I could get the .com for $7 kind of US, and away we went.
Right. Wow. Naming space is so tight these days, as I've mentioned before.
It is.
Yeah. If you had a do-over opportunity, do you know what you would call the company now? Because it's not really related to the business. It kind of is in an abstract sense. So.
Yeah. Look, I'm still fond of it. It still seems to work and resonate with people. And in fact, the company that ended up buying us has gone backwards and forwards on whether they should actually rebrand as SpeedCurve, because the space worked so well in terms of SEO and the reputation that were built up over 15 years that it was quite valuable. So it's still one of those open questions, which is a good one, I think. What do you do when you blend businesses and come up with those brand strategies and things like that?
Perennial question. Most people get it wrong, as you know.
Yeah.
So what is SpeedCurve? What does the company do?
So we do web performance monitoring.
Yep.
And we specifically work with, I guess, larger sort of teams. Larger customers like Airbnb and New York Times, The Guardian newspaper were an early customer. Teams that tend to have a real focus on performance, where they've got an internal team that is tasked with how do we make sure that the user experience that we're delivering is high quality. And we need a set of tools to monitor that. And so that's what SpeedCurve is in a nutshell, is a tool to monitor the user experience and help communicate that across your organization.
So that's some enviable customer names that you've dropped in there.
Yeah.
How did you, as a company from little old New Zealand, manage to acquire brands of that kind of ilk?
It's an interesting story because when I started, I did, the classic thing of go to NZTE, get involved in the local community and try and understand what are the typical patterns and ways of growing a business. And at that point, there was still quite a vibe of if you're a startup and you want to do it for real, you have to have boots on the ground in the US. You have to have this whole sort of mechanism. And in my discussions with people like NZTE, they were like, well, if you don't have those ambitions to grow and be of that sort of scale, then are you just being a lifestyle business? And I found that an interesting tension and kind of place to be in. And I was like, surely there's a way to do this that is smaller scale, that is more authentic, that is just build community. And so the way we ended up with those customers was to be very transparent about, at that point, it was literally just me. I started the business by myself. Steve, my business partner, didn't come on until about a year and a half into it. And I was just like, hey, it's me. I'm here in New Zealand. I've got this idea for a product. If you want to collaborate, let's do it. So I was always very transparent about the scale and the size of the business and was very fortunate to connect with that community. So it turns out the web performance community is surprisingly small. There's probably a couple of hundred people around the world that are sort of deeply involved in these businesses and move around in different businesses. So I quickly became part of that community. It was a community that had no real design talent in it. It was all sort of very engineering led. So when a designer turned up and went, hey, I want to rebuild these experiences so that they're more effective at communicating across an organization, I was welcomed with open arms. And I remember going to my first conference in the States and, day 2 or 3, I'm standing in the Chrome Google offices talking to the Chrome team about how do we improve the data that's coming out of the browser and what thoughts do I have around user experience. And I was like, gosh, it was just little old me in New Zealand like 2 days ago, and here I am in the thick of it. But through those conferences, through those communities, it turns out that those people that are very dedicated to web performance all talk to each other. So very quickly I had contacts at places like the Guardian newspaper, like they were one of the first beta customers. And I said, do you want a free account as long as I can talk to you periodically and you tell me what features you want and I'll share what I'm building, and built relationships with customers like that. So it was very deliberate to be small and authentic, and in some ways that worked in our favor because people were like, oh, I'm not dealing with a sales team here. I'm dealing directly with the people building the tool. This is what I would like. And that just spread like wildfire for a number of years through those larger organizations.
So the scale thing you've mentioned that it could work in your favor, and it did in that instance, but it can also count against you because people might have the perception, rightly or wrongly, that scale brings certainty and security for the business.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that in those senses it worked for you, having that small boutique, intimate customer contact and response and that sort of thing.
Yes.
To your awareness, how did it work against you?
There were actually plenty of times that we said no to customers, that we said, hey, we're not the right fit for you. Like when you sent us a big, massive, master services agreement and said the only way we'll work with you is if you sign this, we were just like, you know what, we're probably not the right fit. Like, our terms were very much best effort, as is where is, sort of acknowledging our limits, I guess. And we would refer those customers on to some of our competitors and other vendors and go, look, they're probably a better fit for you.
Wow.
So
good on you. That's relatively rare.
Yeah, and it didn't. I'm actually still genuinely surprised how little it hindered us. The majority of the business is with larger enterprises. We are talking about analytics, which is not in the critical path, right? So we're not swiping a credit card, and if we go down, there's issues. So we are analytics, we are an add-on. If SpeedCurve goes down, it doesn't bring down a business. So I think that certainly lessens the risk. We were very deliberate about the sort of data we collected, so there was no privacy concerns. We did no user tracking or anything like that, so that we could skirt around those privacy issues. One customer in particular, so we did a whole lot of work with UK Gov. Their digital services team there have always done amazing work in terms of rebuilding their government websites and services. And so we went through a whole audit process with them where they were like, okay, we've got to make sure that, everything is robust. But that was quite a tick to go, well, look, we can be a small business and still service, UK Gov,
Yes.
and, collect their data and provide them with insights.
Mm. If I was to go to Claude and ask it for a playbook on how to build a business based upon a relatively small market set, a couple of hundred, give or take, I would imagine it would come back to me with a playbook that would incorporate turn up to the conferences, speak, meet the people, or at least turn up to the conferences to start with, build relationships and a personal one-on-one with those people. What else do you think it would tell me? Because this is a really interesting story of being intentional, maybe, or being a little bit lucky, or a combination of those two early on. But what else would be some of those things that you did early on that enabled you to succeed in that, quite a microcosm of a space?
Yeah. I'm unsure what Claude will tell you. I mean, Claude tells us all sorts of things these days.
Sometimes it's right, and sometimes it's
It's interesting to see what it would kind of pull together.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, as soon as that community thing started to work for us, we just really leaned into that. And we were very deliberate about the fact that the way we chose to market ourselves, I guess, was through being the experts. And so the people on the SpeedCurve team are largely later on in their careers. They've had really good experiences. A number of them speak at conferences, or even create conferences. So Steve, my business partner, was actually head of performance at Google, and he started a conference called Velocity, which was very successful and was all about that web performance space. And so that just worked tremendously well for us, to the point, in hindsight, and we can get into this later, like it was to our detriment sort of later on in the business, but we just leaned into that community building to the point that we had no sales team, we had no marketing strategy, we did nothing paid, we did absolutely nothing except build community and participate in that community.
Hey, it's Josh. Thanks for listening to the show. When founders talk about the dream exit, they're really talking about freedom. Freedom to choose how to use their time and to decide what comes next. I'm a client of JB Ware in New Zealand, and I know this is what sets them apart. They help entrepreneurs and leaders turn success into significance. A great exit isn't just about the commas in your bank account. It's about what those commas enable you to create. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, helping founders by putting their wealth to work for generations.
So we were on WC3 working groups and helping talk about the problems with web performance and how we monitor things and how we can improve that. And by being in the middle of that conversation and being present, like we never talked about SpeedCurve, we'd use a SpeedCurve chart to illustrate some of the points that we're making, but we were always just participating in the conversation that got us the attention that we needed.
You've mentioned Steve twice,
Yes.
sole founder of the company. 18 months in, you decided to bring on a co-founder,
Yes.
or a business partner.
Yeah.
So why did you do that, and why Steve?
A number of reasons. I mean, I was 18 months in, I was working, by myself in isolation. That was the initial goal, was just, can I pay the mortgage? Can I have more flexibility and spend time with my kids? I had a young family at that point. That was one of the goals, was to get control and over my life and determine my own future. But I think after 18 months, it was like, this would be good to do with other people. And And Steve, yeah, I had got to know him kind of through that period. It turned out he'd very deliberately manufactured situations to my benefit, which I only found out years and years into the business, which was quite fascinating.
What do you mean?
So SpeedCurve itself, like the original synthetic testing, is built on an open source package called Web Page Test, which is very well used in the industry. Unfortunately, it's now pretty much met its demise. It ended up being kind of bought and run into the ground, unfortunately. But at that point, it was open source, and there was quite a bit of noise in the community around, we need a commercial version of this. We need a place where businesses can go and run this in an ongoing fashion and pull the data. And at that point, Google were seriously considering entering the market, and Google went to Steve, who was head of performance at that point. I happened to have emailed Steve a few months prior and gone, hey, here's a bit of a prototype of something I'm creating. Surely there's something that already exists and I'm wasting my time. Can you just, kill this idea for me? And he was like, no, you should totally do it. So he walked into the Google offices and said, no, we shouldn't do this. There's this guy in New Zealand. He's a UX designer. We should create space in the market for other people to succeed and do this. And to Steve's credit, he did that a lot. There are a number of businesses that he kind of helped facilitate and sort of leave space for. I think he realized at that point just how dominant Google was becoming.
Yes.
And wanted to make sure that there was sort of room for other people to contribute in different ways. So
yeah, monopoly through its very virtue, especially if you wield that monopoly, is totally oppressive to other businesses, other people that want to get into the space.
Yes.
The narrative that I think that certainly I have, and I know you're not the expert in Google, but Steve would rather be, but you know a lot more about it than I do. That narrative around Google would be that they were, in some instances, a little bit anti-competitive about how they went about doing things. Yet there's the story about Steve, who's in there championing the little guy.
Yep.
Was that something, was my sense wrong, or was that something that perhaps, broadly speaking, Google could be anti-competitive, but there were the little highlights of things of people like Steve?
I think it speaks more to Steve than Google.
Right.
If I had to categorize that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So you mentioned control a couple of times, and the idea of bringing on a business partner. I presume you shared equity with Steve. That was part of the deal. Yep. That tends to be the attachment to those two things. So that means you have to share control. So you set up the business to get some control of your life and direction and income and that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So how did you deal with that kind of tension that brought along to go, I'm not going to have control of this thing anymore?
I think it comes down to personality and who you're deciding to partner with.
Yeah.
And I've run other businesses before where, there has been more tension between founders, and just, wanting to move on in different directions. But I guess I just felt very aligned with Steve, and there was just a high degree of trust there. Everything, in fact, was based on a handshake.
Like no shareholders agreement, right?
Yeah, no, there's nothing. I was a 100% shareholder throughout the entire business. So Steve just trusted me that, he would get kind of half of it in the end.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's what happened?
Yes. Well,
Guys,
of course. So. I wasn't gonna not follow through on that. But I think that speaks to both Steve and my sort of characters, that we wanted to do it right. Like, he'd been in a number of startups. He was like, Steve's 10 years older than me. He's now fully retired. This was basically his last hurrah of, he'd been in small startups, and then he ended up as head of performance at Yahoo, and then went on to Google, and was then working at Fastly, not really enjoying it. And I think he was like, okay, I've got one last thing left in me. And so, ironically, I was in San Fran being approached by a different business who wanted to buy SpeedCurve. And I was talking to Steve in a consultancy advisory sort of capacity of like, hey, do you think this is a good idea? I'm only 12 months in. Surely it's a bit too soon. They totally, lowballed the offer. So I walked away. But in those discussions, Steve was like, hang on, there's something here
Yeah.
that, I helped facilitate earlier on.
Mm.
So at that point, it was hard to quantify. So I was just like, okay, well, Steve brought a lot. He brought a lot of community. He brought a lot of mana in terms of being ex-head of performance at Google and Yahoo. So it really lifted the visibility of the business. And so I was like, look, do you just want half? And let's just give it a crack and see what happens.
Wow, that's such a great story.
Yeah.
So in those early days of you working together, what were some of the key changes that you saw that Steve brought? You've mentioned the mana, the community kind of aspect, but let's talk about the growth subsequent to Steve coming on board, because it was, little old Mark in New Zealand
Yes.
that was kind of driving this thing. So how did those early kind of sales motions and growth bits look?
Well, for a start, Steve's an engineer, so he could write some code. I would categorize myself as a jack of all trades. I learnt web design back in the late 90s. I graduated from design school just as the web was getting going in New Zealand, and set up an agency and became sort of the more technical kind of founder as part of that. And so my skill set is, like I'd say, I'm a pretty average designer, a pretty average coder, a pretty average business person, but having all those skills, it was great to be able to bootstrap a business by myself and do absolutely everything. But having Steve come in with his relationships, with his mana, and actually be a proper engineer just meant that we could talk to a few more people. It opened a few more doors. And he built a whole sort of half of the product that didn't exist when I launched. So it really expanded our capability and opened more doors as well. So in hindsight, it was definitely the right decision. It really accelerated the business. Yeah.
So you were approached to sell the company super early on. You've just mentioned that. You also approached a number of times to consider taking on investment, but you decided to bootstrap.
Yes.
Why?
Good question. I've been thinking about this, and I think it comes back to control. And to take a bit of a tangent and a bit of a step back, I've been trying to think about where that desire for control comes from. And I think it's actually inspired by my parents and the businesses that they ran. So both my parents are Czech. That's where Zeman comes from. And in 1968, when the Russians rolled into the Czech Republic, they both kind of left in different circumstances. My dad in particular was on a diving trip in what was then Yugoslavia, 18 years old, read about it in the newspaper and just went, I'm not going back. And at that point, there were a number of countries looking for immigrants that needed workers, and Australia was one of those. So my dad ended up in Australia, and a year or two later, my mum ended up there as well. They didn't know each other at this point, but no English. They put them through a 6-week sort of training camp for here's how to learn English. And then my dad, I won't go massively into the details, but he ended up having a career doing all sorts of things where he worked as a fitter and turner, so, manipulating steel and kind of machining things. He ended up building our house. He ended up building a steel kind of yacht that we sailed around kind of each summer. And then he ended up running two very different businesses. One was as a commercial photographer, so he did a lot of work from home, and I used to assist and go out and help shoot stuff. And then later in life, he had an interest in carving smoking pipes, so handmade carved pipes.
Wow.
And he started a whole career in that, largely thanks to the internet. And so one of my first successful e-commerce businesses was actually for my dad, where he would sell these handmade pipes all over the world, collected in Japan and the States and things like that. They sort of sell between 500 to 1,000 US each.
Remarkable.
And I built him a little website that meant that his business could flourish. Didn't really sell many in New Zealand, sold them all internationally. Ironically, that's what SpeedCurve is. SpeedCurve, we hardly had any customers in New Zealand. And 50% of the business was in the States and in Europe. But I guess what I saw growing up in that environment where my dad and my mum would she worked as a microbiologist, but then also helped with the business. I think just the flexibility and the ability to go, I want to determine how I want to be in the world with my own values and run a business based on those values. And I think that's what I really desired when I started SpeedCurve. I wasn't actually particularly interested in the idea. It's not like I had a love of analytics and web performance monitoring. It's kind of boring, to be honest. Like, it's not a sexy kind of space to be in. What I was really interested in is running a business on my own terms, in my own way. And so that's where that desire for control comes from. That's why it was bootstrapped. And that's why we turned down lots of opportunities to expand and I guess take some of those more traditional growth paths where all the profit is turned back into the business, where you bring on VC and you're then held accountable to outside interests. And so I really wanted to be able to determine my own future and run things with my own sets of values. And we ended up doing some things that I think are quite, unusual in terms of the way that we ran the business, the sort of profit sharing we did with our team and things like that were a reflection of that sort of desire to just sort of run things a bit differently.
You mentioned earlier on turning down customers.
Yes.
And if your business was VC backed or otherwise, it's unlikely that someone in that context would be like, you what? That they wouldn't be doing that to you at a board meeting. You turned down 3 customers last year or last quarter, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so that would certainly be one of the hallmarks, that mid-teens kind of mantra, which was when you were scaling the business, that grow at all costs was the mentality that we kind of had really right up until COVID and perhaps even a little bit post that.
Yeah.
COVID growth just happened accidentally over COVID for a lot of businesses, but that's certainly one thing. So some of the hallmarks that meant for you as a business was that profit share mentality. So I'm curious as to how that worked. And the second part of that question is what else that you did that you think that might have been you were able to do because you had the control and the freedom to be able to do in the business?
Yeah. I mean, as I said earlier, the goal with the business was really just, can I pay my own mortgage? And so my ambitions were not, like, even though I've run multiple kind of businesses and been involved in management teams, I don't know if I'm a classic entrepreneur. I'm not like itching to go, oh, here's my next business. I'm an idealist, and people have labeled me as a hopeful idealist, which is an interesting kind of, way to pitch it. But I wanted something that was kind of run with a particular set of values. And I guess I was a bit disillusioned with, I was working as a creative director in agencies. It's always, project to project. Something I think I also got from my dad was a sense of craft and a sense of doing things well and doing them properly. He would machine his pipes and polish them beautifully before he sent them off. And, he could command those prices of, $1,000 or $2,000 for a handmade pipe. And so I wanted to bring that same sense of ethic to running a business. And that meant a few different things. Like as we grew and it became more successful, I didn't initially want to build a massive team, so we kept everything deliberately small. And that became quite unusual because as we kept it small and we got more and more customers, the profit grew. And so we had all this surplus profit, which it's like, well, what do you do? Do you reinvest that in the business and kind of grow and have these big, bold ambitions? In the end, Steve and I took the profit out of the business, and so it really became a cash machine very quickly. And it was only something I realized later as I spent more time with other founders who were sort of like trapped in their business a little bit, paying themselves an okay wage, often less than what they would pay people on their team, and beholden to this idea of an exit as the only way to get value out of the business. And in the meantime, the way we were running SpeedCurve, there was just a lot of profit coming out of the business. So then we were like, well, this is unfair if it's just Steve and myself. And so because there was no desire to exit, like it was never our intention to sell the business, we were like, how do we involve the people, our team, which, I mean, it's a family business in some ways. You know, the people that came to SpeedCurve were later in their careers. At our maximum size, we had 7 people. So, you know, we're talking about a pretty small, intimate business here. And we were, you know, something I am really proud of is that we paid people incredibly well. We gave them a job where there was no real stress. Ironically, running SpeedCurve is the least stressful thing I've done, which, you know, you hear most founders say the opposite, right?
Totally.
That it's the most stressful thing. But I think the only reason I can say that is, sure, there's an element of good luck that we were in the right sort of niche and we found the right customers, but it was also the deliberate decisions about how we wanted to run the business. And so in the end, we just said to the team, hey, we'll give you a percentage of the business sort of on paper. And then we literally did a monthly profit share. So at the end of each month, we'd go, okay, here's the surplus profit. How much do we want to leave in the business? How much do we want to take out? And when we took it out, we just shared that with the team. So rather than holding on to that idea of I've got options or shares or equity and maybe one day it'll become liquid, we were making that liquid every month and sharing it with the team. And for the team that had been there for 8 years, like we're talking about considerable amounts of money on top of their great salaries that were already 2 or 3 times above market value. So it was really nice to be able to share that with the team.
Yes, this is such a counter narrative to the classic traditional approach to building a startup, especially in the SaaS space. So I'm curious, so if someone's sitting here listening to this and they've got a business which sounds like yours, which is a cash machine in terms of the words that you use to ape them back to you, how did you calculate people's requisite share of the bonus? Was it literally there's 5 people, there's 100% of the bonus available, you get 20% each, or was it based on tenure or proportionate back to salary? How did you do that calculation?
Yeah, it was just, we kept it really simple. So depending on how long you'd been in the business, we'd give you a percentage sort of share of what the profit share was. Over time, everyone had been there so long, like no one ever left SpeedCurve. So no one ever left in that 13 years that we ran. I mean, it's only 7 people max,
Yes.
but and so in the end, everybody had like an equitable kind of share. I mean, Steve and I had the majority, but then we had, I think it was between sort of 20 or 30% of the profit that we would share with the rest of the team and just go every month, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like that John Grisham, I think it was, book, The Firm, where they were the lawyers to the mob, the mafia, and you couldn't leave. So a little bit different because in this instance, it's a great place to work, very unstressful and incredibly well remunerated.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the fact that pretty much everyone at SpeedCurve has said that this is the best job they've ever had. It was certainly the best job I've ever had.
Yes.
And yeah, I feel a lot of pride in terms of the way that we ran it and the sorts of non-stressful kind of, that people could do their best work.
Yes.
And that really did come down back to the relationships that we had with those customers. And often when customers would realize that they're dealing with a small team and they're talking directly to the people that are actually building the product, we'd often find that the tone would change from that, I've had some terrible relationships with vendors, right? And you're dealing with salespeople and all these layers and you're just like, this is just terrible. And so when people realized, we had some customers, Expedia was a customer at one point, and we got on the call with them and talked about some features and we were like, you know what, that's a good idea. 2 days later, we'd shipped that feature and they were just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we just had a conversation and 2 days later we shipped it. That never kind of happens, but because we were so small, we were kind of nimble. We were like, that's a good idea. Let's just, push that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, back to the startup community, of which I'm guessing the likes of NZT would have invited you along to events.
Yes.
Typically, those sorts of things are a little bit of camaraderie, meeting people that are in similar kind of situations. But inevitably, what you want to be able to do is to kind of surface some of the tensions, problems that you're facing, so that people can kind of share their own experience in relation to solving those problems. So you go along going, I've had my open experience, and I've been able to learn something and maybe connect with others based upon a shared issue we're trying to resolve. So if I think about the classic startup problems, funding is a key problem. Staff is another problem. Those two things can be related or not related. Growth is another problem. And so I'm going, well, tick, tick, tick here with SpeedCurve. So did you get looked at like you were some sort of weird alien in these groups when you're turning up and you're kind of going, I can't relate to that issue? So how did you fit in with the group?
Very much so. So you've been part of a number of founders groups, and it became a running gag that they'd always make me go last because they didn't want to hear yet again how easy and good it was going for SpeedCurve. And so, that was, I did feel a little bit like, why are there not more businesses around with this sort of shape? And I guess that's part of my motivation of coming and chatting to you today, is that I do feel like sometimes in the startup community is such a strong pattern of the way to succeed is to take VC and, build a board and do it this way is what you often come across. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I admire the people that decide to do it that way. But I think there are lots of different ways to run business. And I guess I'm proud of the fact that, we ran something in a different way with our own set of values, and in my mind was very successful and delivered a product that people loved, and that you can do things in different ways. And I think too often we don't hear those stories, because it's the VC funds this that gets into the media, or here's the big exit kind of number. You don't hear about all the other people under the radar, probably more SpeedCurve size, that are running great kind of businesses that are just not looking for that attention, but they're out there.
Yes.
Especially in places like the game community. Like, there are all sorts of people, building all sorts of interesting things that are successful around the world that you just don't really hear about. And I'd love there to be more of that, more diversity in terms of the way that we think about startups.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I've said thank you already, but thank you for sharing the story. We're not ending, by the way. But the proxy that tends to exist for success when you're earlier on in the journey is the fundraising story.
Sure.
And such raised 3 million, 10 million, 100 million, whatever the number might be. And from the outside, you can kind of go, wow, that's incredible, that's amazing. But there's all these consequences that happen as a result of that, right? Control, pressure, expectations, all these sorts of things that can go on. My hope is that the authentically useful and values-based organisations that are providing something which is going to elevate our experience in financial services or our experience in exchanging products or services will be better as a consequence of these things. But all industries at the outset tend to be quite Wild West in their very nature. So we talked about this conversation before coming on air, and you didn't have a sales team, and yet you built this business to be a really solid, consistent, recurring revenue rate, and yet you didn't have an individual salesperson. Was that because you thought that we've got this, we don't have the need to kind of shoot for the stars and grow at an exponential rate? Was it because you wanted to maintain the control of the sales process and the relationships that were built? Was it something different?
I think it was something different. I was just following my nose. We were following the relationships. We were finding a lot of success just through word of mouth, and building those relationships through communities, and customers just turned up. And so not long after Steve started, people just kept coming through the doors. And so I think that's where we had nailed really good market fit in terms of a niche kind of B2B product. There were these teams, inside these larger SaaS kind of businesses that really wanted to understand user experience. There were not really many tools around. And something that I guess I really brought to the market with SpeedCurve was a design way of thinking. The original genesis for SpeedCurve was that I used to work at Digital Arts, which was an agency, and New Zealand.com and the tourism board was one of our biggest customers. And I had to stand up in front of the board and talk about, well, what is the user experience of New Zealand.com like? What is it like in China versus UK versus US? How do we know that we're delivering a good user experience? And so I went out looking for tools. It turns out that there wasn't much in the space. And what was there had been built by engineers, and it was okay, but, it was very engineering focused, whereas I was looking for almost more of a communications tool that could help me not only diagnose a user experience problem, but communicate that across the organization. And so those were the sort of design principles that I brought into SpeedCurve, which is, yes, it's an engineering tool, but it's an engineering tool that helps those engineers communicate the problems that they're having with product managers, with designers, with kind of management teams. And so that really helps shape the success of the business. But I mean, back on the sales thing, I would just put it down to naivety. Things were going really well. It was like, oh, we don't need this. I think in hindsight, it was almost a little bit of a badge of honor that in some points we were like, you know what, we spend 99% of our time just working on product. We have no salespeople. We don't do any marketing. We don't do any of these normal functions that you need in a business. We can just work on product and connect with customers and they will love it. And I think that was true for about 10 years, and it went like this, and then the market started to change around us. Part of it was our own success. So something else that I'm really proud of at SpeedCurve is that we helped shape the industry quite a lot. So through our talks at conferences, through our relationships with the Chrome team at Google and things like that, we brought in a number of metrics that are now pretty much used by everybody in the industry. And so,
What like?
So the core web vitals
Okay.
are now sort of used as a standard set of metrics. And one of those in particular, largest contentful paint, is this idea of when is content visible on a web page and the important content. And that really came from me incessantly asking, from a user experience design point of view, where are the metrics for this? How are we not measuring when the most important content on the page is visible to the user? Surely we want to know that. But really there was no metrics around that. And so at SpeedCurve, we created a metric where we looked at the video recordings and we did some pixel analysis to try and identify when those largest elements were painted. And we called it hero times, and we talked about it at conferences. And it got picked up by the team at Chrome, who were looking, also like us, they wanted to standardize their user experience metrics because they wanted a set of metrics that they could feed into search engine rankings to quantify, is a site fast and does they have a good user experience? And so they took our hero times, that sort of concept, and renamed it as largest contentful paint. And that's now one of the key metrics that, probably the main metric that the whole industry uses. And that inevitably started to impact on SpeedCurve, because when Google pushed those metrics and standardized on them, everybody added them. So when initially SpeedCurve was a fairly unique tool in terms of front-end web performance monitoring. Now suddenly everybody started to add these core web vitals, and everybody had these measurements, which I'm very proud of, that we could influence and move the market along. And certainly with Google's weight behind it, everybody just went, we have to do this. But now, in a market, we're suddenly competing against all these other players that now have similar metrics. And I would say in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, there's been a bigger push to consolidate tools. So in the space that we're in, the observability tools are adjacent to us, and they have done big horizontal plays of just we're adding all the types of monitoring to our tool sets. So we ended up being in a position where we had customers saying, we love your tool, we know it's the best tool, it's specialist, it's deep, it kind of gives us everything we want, but we're being forced to consolidate on larger horizontal tools, and we can get enough out of that. And I agree that it's like they could get enough of the basics out of those tools. And so we started to see our revenue start to hit a hump and come down the other side.
Right.
And that's an interesting challenge, right? Like when do you know your time is done as a product? Like we see lots of products come and go.
Yeah.
You know, when is the time to pivot? You know, when is the time to let go?
Yes. So that moment for a lot of businesses is one that they will fight tooth and nail to get around, either through feature additions, through building something into an adjacent space, through maybe trying to do an acquisition, that sort of stuff. What was it like for you to see that your growth curve leveled off and then drop? What was that like?
Well, so this is the tough bit for SpeedCurve, because we were arrogant, because we were like, hey, we just do product and people love us for our product. When that market started to change, we had no sales team. We had no real marketing mechanism. Revenue's declining. Steve and I are like, well, do we want to try and build that capability? We as a team, we tried to rally our skills and try and do a bit more sales ourselves, try and do a bit more marketing. We tried some paid kind of plays and things like that. We spent a good sort of 2 or 3 years becoming increasingly worried about the impact on the business. I mean, it wasn't a dramatic decline. It was just it went from 10 years of doing this to just slowly coming down maybe like 8 to 10% per year in terms of revenue. So it wasn't an overnight problem, but it was increasingly becoming more and more of a problem. Everybody's getting a profit share, so everyone's aware of the problem. So as a team, we did try to work on getting more visibility, but we were not getting a lot of traction. And then being essentially a family unit, I was faced with those challenges of, well, do I start letting go of some of the team to replace them with sales opportunity, people, marketing functions? Like essentially we were the wrong shape to deal with a different market. And so in that 12, 15 years, kind of the market had changed and we were no longer the right shape. And so what do we do? And even though we didn't want to exit, around that time, we just got a random call from a business who is also a deep and specialist tool, who were like, hey, if we put 2 specialist tools together, we can move up into this observability place, and we too can be a horizontal player with a whole lot of tools in the toolkit to have a broader offering.
And this was Embrace, I presume?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you fielded a phone call. It was at the time when revenue was dropping off a little bit, profitability was coming down. It had been
for a number of years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about those early conversations, because typically people tend to circle around each other and they say, tell us about your business. And they're like, well, we're doing really well and times are good and we're profitable and that sort of stuff. But at what stage did things start to get serious? What was the early kind of interactions that you had with you knew them, obviously. You knew of Embrace.
We didn't actually.
You didn't? Okay. Adjacent space. Right.
Yeah, in adjacent space. They were fully in the mobile native app space, which we had deliberately stayed away from because it was like, well, that's a whole kettle of fish that we just don't want to get into. Like, it is something we had explored, was how are there adjacent tools we could add to try and bolster our own kind of offering, but it was just, look, we're barely capable of, maintaining the specialist deep tool that we've got. I really didn't want to try and, dilute that by going horizontal. So no, hadn't heard of them, but knew of some of the people in the business who had good reputations and had come from other good places. It was basically just a series of conversations, and as you can tell, I like being pretty authentic and transparent about things. So we were upfront, very early on about, well, look, this is the state that we're in. You can see our numbers, you can see the challenges that we're confronted with, and they were still keen. And keen for a number of reasons. We had an amazing team. They were looking for expertise. We've got the experts in the field. We had a great specialist tool that they could, bolt on and offer. And I think most attractively, we had an amazing customer list. Over that time, we'd built up really good, solid relationships with, big businesses all through Europe and the US. And I've got to say, it's amazing working with Embrace now to see the sales teams in action. And they are going and turning, what were 20K a year plans for us that we were like, hey, we're doing all right. This is a good plan. They're talking to the right people. They're turning those into 800K a year plans. So they are 10xing our customer base.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, 40x? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot.
A lot, many
it's it's quite remarkable to, the SpeedCurve team are looking at each other going, oh man, why couldn't we do this? Just go into our customers and, talk the bigger game, make the bigger promise. I mean, together, we do have a really attractive offering, and I think customers are getting that, and it's just they're getting access to conversations way, way further up in the stack. Where being a specialist tool, we were further down in the food chain, and we were further down where we were discretionary budget, right? We were like, yeah, sure, we can spend 20K on this. It's just someone's line item. That was decent for us, but it was meaningless for a big enterprise. Whereas now they're going in, they're going, look, this is fundamental, this is critical, do it properly. You can do it properly with us, and they're turning them into massive deals. And so getting access to the 1,000-odd customers that we had, some of those are tiny, but, we probably had a good nearly 200 relationships with, big enterprise businesses.
You often think about the not just the type of person like the, ICP that you're selling to, ideal customer profile, but the level of the organization in which that person sits at.
Yes.
And you've touched on a really valid point. If you're down at a manager kind of level, the sub typically 50K, then it's quite a quick sign-off process and something quite straightforward to get through. The downside is that you'll get in quickly, but you'll also be turned over quite quickly as well, quite often. And it's also not a strategic thing. So long sales cycles on the way in mean long sales cycles on the way out. So you tend to have better stickiness with enterprise software. And so what I'm hearing you say about the relationship that the two businesses, Embrace and SpeedCurve, had together is that, 1 + 1 = 5. So you're able to go up the stack, higher price point, more strategic importance, probably a longer sales cycle as well. Is that correct? But
yeah, I mean,
overall.
we love self-serve. We would just have people email us and go, can you send us an invoice? And we're like, yeah, sure. We'll just generate an invoice, or better still, just put your credit card in here and go for it.
Yep.
We preferred not to talk to people unless we were talking about the product and the problems that we were helping them solve.
Yes.
Like, we didn't want to talk to procurement and other people like that. We were just like, how can we make everything self-serve?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that they were pretty keen on your team, which sounds like a bit acqui-hire, but then you said that they were also pretty keen on the 1,000 customers, which is, buying a business and a business model. But to what extent have they continued to run with the product that you spent all these years crafting and building as well?
Yeah, well, that's still there, and that's the bit that I'm enjoying now. So I'm now back in a more of a creative director role at Embrace. And certainly one of the other frustrations at SpeedCurve is that it's great to have a small, intimate team, but there's only so fast you can move. And now having a much bigger team and having the resources to execute on the ideas that we wanted to execute, I'm actually really enjoying that. And so to Embrace's credit, they have taken the SpeedCurve team and they've put us in real leadership positions kind of throughout Embrace. And so we're bringing all the SpeedCurve thinking, we're bringing the product. Like, SpeedCurve still exists and will exist for, quite some time probably. But I think a lot of our effort now is bringing some of that thinking, making it even better, and really kind of maturing the joint offering that we have. So I'm actually really loving that opportunity to double down in that space.
In keeping with the theme of our conversation, also an uncommon story for founders to love the working for the people that have acquired them. Given where you've ended up inside the business and the nature of the acquisition, what was the due diligence process like? What were the things that they spent most time looking at, and how long did they go through that process for?
It was a good process. It took probably about 8 months from first
Standard.
contact through to final kind of signing. A lot of diligence around the customers. I think there was a lot of, and we were open book with like, here's the customers. They wanted to talk through a lot of the high value customers, I think, to assess what sort of opportunity is this for us to go in and then kind of sell. Yeah, that was probably the main diligence. There was a bunch of other things, and crikey, signing off all the warranties and things like that. Like
Yes.
that's a process. Yeah, but no, the due diligence was pretty good. Like their team's kind of fantastic, and Eric in particular, who's like one of the founders of Embrace, like he's done all sorts of things. Like he ran a games company kind of back in the day and had a big exit around that, and sort of has run a lot of businesses really well. So I like the sort of the values that he sort of brings to it. And certainly it's always hard to tell, but in some ways it's just a bigger SpeedCurve. Like the team is amazing. Everyone's doing it for the right reasons. The other thing I'm really loving is that Embrace is all the things that I didn't want SpeedCurve to be. It's VC kind of backed. It's like, yeah, we're on this growth path, like how are we going to do the exit at the end of that kind of, it's in the heart of kind of that US kind of startup culture. It's really delightful to go from SpeedCurve, which is bootstrapped and, deliberately not that shape, to always wonder what would that journey have been like if I had taken VC and we had reinvested the profit and just grown. Like, what would that journey have been like in SpeedCurve? In some ways, I'm getting to now experiencing that by being inside Embrace and going, well, this is very, very different, but similar product, similar space, same problems, but doing it in a very, very different way. So I'm really enjoying being on the leadership team and being witness to how that works in that culture.
So you had a bunch of preconceptions about what the alternate life and business could have been like, the high growth, the getting to a business of scale, the taking investment, and now you're getting to see that in practicality. It's like the alternate universe. You're living into it and Embrace as opposed to SpeedCurve. So what preconceptions were validated for you when you went through the door?
Yeah, it was interesting. There's quite a few preconceptions there. I think certainly there were some of the negative ones of, this is all just going to be determined by the VCs, that this is all, there's going to be so much external pressure that it would to the detriment of the product. And I think certainly that was a preconception. At SpeedCurve, everything was about product. So I guess I was concerned that with that external pressure, like how would that shape, the roadmap and the desire to ship. I don't know if this is normally the case, but certainly Embrace, one of the things I've been impressed by is that everybody is 100% focused on the product as well and on how we deliver value and where the product still needs to be improved to deliver on that promise that we're making to customers. And everybody, from top down is aligned around that and delivering on that. And that's very reassuring because that's the thing that I always looked for. I have had the opposite experience, like early on when someone tried to buy SpeedCurve a year into the business. Their main pitch to me was, come and join us. We're on the startup growth story. One of my proudest moments is like ringing the bell on the stock exchange when we IPO'd, like we're going to be rolling in it, come and join the journey. And they didn't talk at all about the product
or the customer
and the value or the customer. Like it was kind of there, but that was not their main pitch. And I was like, hang on, the whole reason I'm doing SpeedCurve is because I want control over being able to craft a really nice product and take the time to craft that product to a point that people really enjoy it. Like that was one of my key motivators. So that certainly reinforced that was the classic, we're just here for the exit.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go back to that sales piece. So working inside a much bigger machine now, and you've talked about the sales motions and the value that they've been able to bring as a combination of those two things. Do you wonder if you had gone down the path of maybe building a sales competency that you might have ended up with, 3, 5, 10x, kind of the price being able to be extracted from each of those deals that you did with customers? Do you think you left some money on the table?
For sure. I think if we had more of a proper sales function, there's definitely money we left on the table.
Yeah.
There is still that awkwardness between being further up in the organization and doing the bigger deals and everything that comes with having to deliver that. I think we did live in a sweet spot where we were smaller and doing smaller deals, but we were flying far enough under the radar that the fact that we were small, the fact that we had a whereas as is kind of terms and conditions meant that we didn't get the same rigor, I think, applied to us as a product. And I guess we found a very lucrative sweet spot there where we weren't selling, $10 plans. We were selling, 20 to 50K a year plans. But in a big enterprise, that's still effectively under the radar. And so we could base that on the relationships that we had in the organizations where they trusted us. Whereas when you move further up the organization, you're selling the $1 million a year contracts. Yeah, you can't just be, a tiny business where it's like, sure, we're just going to run it the way that we want to run it. So it's tricky. I think, yes, with a salesperson, we would have had more success, but I think in some ways that would have put more pressure. How do we service that kind of pressure? What sort of shape business do we need to be? Do we need to jump from a 7-person to a 30 or a 50-person business to do that properly? I had come out of a management team running, an agency with kind of 30 to 50 people. I was like, I've done that for 5 years. I don't really want to just be managing people. I still spent 90% of my time designing and writing code day to day. That's all I did was build product. And so being able to do that for that long and in a non-stressful way was delightful.
Yeah. And the metrics that we care about in SaaS businesses, CAC, customer acquisition cost, is one of those things. And yours would have been minuscule because you didn't have sales or marketing that you're investing in. And so, that metric would have been absolutely through the roof. So, are you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, we did invest in some things in terms of attending conferences and kind of, travel and stuff like that. But that was our strategy. So we did invest in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is that enterprise deals of probably more than about $50,000 per year, definitely more than 100,000. You're not getting those things faxed in or someone email you saying, send us an invoice. You've got a sales process you need to go through. It's probably going to be competitive. You might have an RFP, God forbid. And so that's a totally different way of doing business. And so I totally understand where you landed.
It's totally different. I remember in those early days when Steve first joined, like we would literally just have days where 2 or 3 requests for an invoice would come in.
Wow.
Just customers would just email us and go, hey, we want SpeedCurve and we want it for a year and we want the 10K a year plan. Can you just send us an invoice?
Yes.
And, we'd get multiples of those a week through no real kind of effort.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Talking about multiples, let's talk about scales. So where was the business up to when you did sell? Where were you kind of sitting as much as you can share from a revenue rate? And then what was the kind of calculation of the valuation of the business when you sold?
Yeah. Well, it was going really well. I think one of the more interesting metrics at SpeedCurve was, the amount of revenue that we were bringing in per person. For such a small business, we were getting close to, $1 million in revenue per person.
I reckon 2026 is perhaps the most important year of the new millennium. This is powered through artificial intelligence. There's a tectonic shift going on in business right now, and I think you have an opportunity to capitalize on it. I've written a white paper. It's available on my website, joshcomrie.com, under the resources section, completely free of charge. And it'll give you some thinking and some resources and some how-tos in this rapidly changing world. Enjoy.
Which, that's why we paid 2 or 3 times, salary and did a profit share, because there was a lot of profit coming in. So my original intention was just to pay the mortgage, and, it certainly exceeded all my expectations there in terms of how the business grew by itself and how we were able to, share that amongst the team.
Yeah. And then in terms of the parting valuation for the business, that sale point?
Yeah, so that was interesting, and it was interesting to figure out, a business with declining revenue. Usually you want to sell when it's going up,
Totally.
not coming down. And certainly when Steve and I had toyed with the idea of like, are we ever going to sell this? Steve actually retired out of the business like 3 or 4 years before we sold. He was already retired. And we were like, well, what sort of shape would it need to be in? And when we talked to people, they were like, well, you do need a sales team. You need all the functions of a healthy business to then be able to sell that on to someone. And because we didn't necessarily want to build the sales team and build all that normal stuff, we were like, oh, well, we're never going to sell it. But like I said, we were transparent about that with Embrace, and I guess they really valued what we could bring in terms of that customer book and their expertise as well to help integrate into their team.
Yeah, remarkable. So back to that revenue per headcount, it's one of the things that I always get people to think about measuring. I pull it actually now down to EBITDA per headcount because, what's the individual contribution down to that level. Gross margin is another way that people think about it. But out of Silicon Valley, it's become quite a popular metric. I don't know if you know this, but Adobe is by far and away number one. They were before Anthropic. So this is about 9-month-old data I'm talking about now. I do wonder, Anthropic are adding $20 million a day of ARR at the moment. Absolutely astounding, unbelievable. And so they might be creeping above, but at that point in time, Adobe were $550,000 USD per headcount, and singularly by a long margin, they were the most successful from a revenue per headcount. I invested in this company. Adobe were the acquirer of Moxion software. So that was the movie analytics software, and they were one of the kind of key people that they could see as being buying them down the path because they were such a successful and acquisitive kind of business. We talked about Claude earlier on, and you said publicly, my research dug up that you said that if Claude had come along maybe 12 months earlier, we may not have been in the position that we're in, and we may not have sold the company. Tell me more.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting to think about the impact that the AI is having, and particularly tools like Claude. I guess it just made me wonder, we were constrained as a small team, and we deliberately didn't want to take on some of those horizontal features that might have broadened our tool set. It's quite intriguing to think now, a year later, with the pivot that Claude has, what is it, December, January, everyone was suddenly like, actually, Claude Code has legs and can do real things. It would have been interesting to go, as a team of 7, what can we now achieve using these tools, which we didn't have 12 months earlier, and would that have helped turn the boat around at all? In terms of content generation and things like that as well, and go-to-market strategies is just, I think it's quite an interesting time to, and you see this, right? Like on Reddit, like every forum I'm in, it's like every day people are posting, oh, here's my vibe-coded prototype for this problem that I've wanted to solve, kind of, who else has this problem? I'm doing the same thing myself. I've got 5 different products on my laptop now that I'm just like, you know what, that product's not quite right. Hey, Claude, can you do this for me? And
Yes.
it's pretty remarkable at doing a throwaway prototype. Like, it's not something you'd want to put in production, but to be able to test an idea, test an interactivity tool, like I'm really into bike packing, and so I've been looking for a tool that can help me slice up a route and like plan it out into how much elevation and distance do I want to do every day. There's some tools around for that, but nothing particularly dynamic. So I was, within a couple hours, I'd built myself a tool where I can totally slice and dice and plan like a 10-day like bike packing trip. And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe do I chuck that up and start charging like $5 for it? So I think just this is happening everywhere right now, is that people are taking ideas and exploring what that means in terms of interactive prototypes and designs. And some of it's good, some of it's
good,
bad,
some of it's rubbish.
but it's a pretty intriguing time in terms of the creativity that unlocks.
Yes.
And I talked earlier about, I needed to have a 15-year career before I was at the point where I was generalist enough that I could take on building a business solo and know enough about code and design and running a business to do it myself. You always hear about people struggling to find the technical co-founder that, I have this idea, but I can't do it by myself. I need the team, I need the investment to actually execute it. I wonder if that's becoming less and less true these days, where people can exercise an idea and use these tools to get something out into the market that might be kind of shoddy, but can validate if there's a need there. And if people start whipping out their credit cards and paying for it, then you go, okay, now we've got to do it for real.
Yes, I totally agree. Historically, most of the cost in building a software business was around the creation of the IP, was around the 10, 20, 50 engineers that you needed to have. And so that has, kind of markedly shifted now towards distribution. Sales and marketing is where the cost is incurred, because we've gotten so many interruptions in our life now that we're kind of fending everything off and shutting everything down. It's very difficult to get people's attention. The attention economy is real. And so what I talk about now is that your moat in business may be a little bit about your product and your defensibility of that, but it's actually a lot around the customer set that you've got and the recurring revenue base that you have. That's actually your moat in today's business. And so a multi-million-dollar turnover company, 1,000-odd customers, that would have been a really interesting thing to consider perhaps a year earlier, in support of your comment around building an MVP versus commercializing that product. I had the same experience myself, not being a coder, but being a founder of a company that had built a software product in the background. I understood the technicalities and what needed to go on, but I hadn't gone through the process of build. So I spent 3 days during the course of a week just before Easter building a product for my own use and the work that I do, the consulting work that I do. And once I'd done the pre-work, the thinking beforehand, the scoping of the product, building the principles around what it was that I wanted this thing to look like, and thinking about things like security and integration, it took me 3 days to stand up actually a pretty good prototype. Then it got interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I need to start bringing on my customers to give them a sense of what this thing's like, because it's a pretty useful thing that I've built, I think. And so I started to think about provisioning, getting user management on board, controls, proper security procedures. And I've spent the last 6 weeks doing what we call hardening, which you'll know about, basically making the thing robust, secure, integratable for other people to be able to use this thing with the knowledge that it's not going to fall apart and nobody's going to be able to see the data that's getting put into that. And so that 2 or 3 days that now people are going, I've built a thing and it's incredible to take it out of the world. I'm like, have you tested it properly out in the real world? Have you gotten customers? Have you tried to make it work in the wild? Because that's the, probably I think now going to be the hard part, and then making that thing like a proper application. Thoughts?
Well, that stuff's only going to get easier as well, isn't it? As we go through more and more of those patterns. It does make me reflect on, where is the value? Like what is it that we're doing when we're building these things? And it makes me interested in, what are we bringing as the human to this enterprise? And I think it's largely the act of curation and the act of taste. And I wonder if that's going to now be the differentiation. Like, when everyone can crank out the same code, it's about how you curate the user experience through whatever tool you're building or the taste that you bring to it. And everyone's enamored by Claude and everyone's cranking out code. They've all got the same gradient kind of fills on them. Like, they're attractive, but they're all the same. And so I think we're going through this maturity thing of like being enamored by the very first iteration of something and like, look, I can make something. That thing looks like the same as everyone else. And so the next layer will be, well, what are the decisions? Like, what are the curated choices you're making about how this problem is solved, where the value will be? And I think that's interesting to think about, how you're interacting with these systems.
Mm-hmm. Discernment is the word that we've been throwing around a little bit over the last few months or so around your ability to have discernment, which is a combination of understanding what users might like, what's going to work out in practical senses, functionality, plus a couple of other things, I think, as well. And so my mind goes to people like Johnny Ives, maybe, the guy that was behind all of the Apple products that then went off to did he do Nest as well? Have I got that right? And then they brought him back in.
Unsure.
Unsure, but now he's off. He's off doing something interesting now.
He's at OpenAI, kind of working on their new phone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, he's joined the dark side, so to speak. Yeah.
It is interesting. The other thing that I'm curious about, from a UI perspective, is that we spend a lot of time distilling and boiling down everyone's needs into a common set of patterns that, like we hope serves everybody. And in a world where you can spin up multiple front ends really easily, I wonder, how that's going to affect the act of prototyping user experiences. And it's now conceivable that you could have multiple front ends to your product, right? It's like, is this the tool that better serves enterprise? Is this the tool that better serves, the pay-as-you-go $15 customer? This was a tension we always had at SpeedCurve, which was like, where are we getting the most value from and how are we trying to pitch this and trying to make a UI that is simple enough for, a small business to use, but complex enough that it can serve enterprise. And we're always trying to jam that in the same UI. It's like now it could be pretty trivial to go, well, look, let's just split that UI apart, or have 5 different UIs that all access the same platform and the data, but you're expressing that data in different ways. So I think we're going to see an explosion of design thinking and design practices, and certainly I'm seeing it inside Embrace. Like now, when I go and have a meeting with an engineer or a PM on a product, like they're like, well, here's my Claude prototype, where it's just like I threw around a few ideas and. I don't know. I welcome that. Like, rather than design being this esoteric kind of, genius thing you got to go away and figure out and bring the magic back. It's like if everybody's turning up with different prototypes and interactive ways of exploring the world, it's like I think that only accelerates the conversation, right, about what is right. But I also wonder, could multiple things be right? Which is not. We've not really had the time and permission to do that, right? Like, you needed those 20 people just to get the one thing going. If we're in a world where we can spin up multiple experiences, what is that going to do to design practice?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about custom software, essentially, kind of rather than go out and try and acquire 10,000 or 100,000 customers, you might work with 500 or 1,000, and they have a very, kind of specific and to a degree homogenous kind of thing that you're delivering to those people, or they've built their own application rather than getting something off the shelf.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you could take it the next step as well, right? Which is me as a person, I like to consume apps in this way.
Yeah.
And, hey, product, can you just deliver it to me in this way and spin up a bespoke front end in the way I like to consume it? Like, is it on my mobile? Is it, on a desktop? Is it, just give me the nerdy kind of like data view, or, give me the nice kind of eye candy. It's like, I wonder if you go even further, where we're generating hundreds of front ends based on what I want as a person out of the data and the tools.
It's going to be fascinating to follow. I have to get you back on in a year and we can talk about how things have played out.
Yeah, love to.
Especially within a bigger business like Embrace. So, Mark, there's an alternate universe, and there's an alternate Mark Zeman who's in that universe. He has a different career than is that of the one that you've experienced, which is moving into ultimately the entrepreneurial space, building a really cool product around web analytics, and then exiting that business to go and join another organization in the same space. What is that alternate career?
That's an interesting one. I've always been interested in fine arts. So when I started out in a design program at Massey, I also considered doing fine arts. I actually started a master's in fine arts and then gave up because I didn't like the politics. Did a master's in design instead. And so, yeah, I think an alternate career could have been fine arts and probably more photography, kind of that sort of space.
There's politics in fine arts?
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. The bit I didn't like is, well, I love it and I hate it. It's like I love going to a contemporary art talk where you hear an artist contextualize and talk about their practice, because the value is not always in the artifact, right? Like you're an art collector, you'd know this. Like sometimes you walk into a temporary gallery and, there's something kind of hanging on the wall, and I always have this debate with my parents where they walk and they go, there's nothing there. Like it leaves me cold. They're very aesthetically driven.
Right.
And so in a world of conceptual art, you've got to play a game with the curator, right? You've got to signal to the curation and the galleries, this is the conceptual game that I'm playing, and it's not necessarily like the artifact is a signal into that conceptual space.
Yes.
And so I love being witness to that and like understanding an artist's practice. I just didn't want to do it myself. Like I was way too enamored with the surface, with aesthetics, with the manufacturing, the artifact. That's where I'm way more a designer.
Yes.
And so having to, my words, like I felt like having to pander to curators, to the gallery, to the conceptual practice, to place myself somewhere in the art conceptual practice, I just had zero interest in. And so when I was confronted with that, I was like, you know what, I might just pivot this back to like a design master's instead.
Yeah. Fair play.
But I still, I love photography. I love moving image. And yeah, I think an alternative career could have been an arts practice.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Some contemporary, quite a lot of abstract art, and you talked about the thing that you hate. One of my bugbears is people walking into a gallery or a exhibition and stuff that slots into those two and other categories, and they go, I could have done that. I'm like, firstly, well, you didn't. Right, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing is you don't have the narrative, which I think is what you're talking about there around, why this has come into being, the interrelationships that it has, why this is an important work, why now for these things. And that thing is why there's some value often attributed to that piece of work.
Yes.
Your ability to find and tell that story effectively, which is what a great gallerist will do. And I find it actually quite interesting and often a little bit sad and awkward when you go to Art in the Park is a really good example of this, where you've got some lower priced stuff. It typically is the 1 to 5,000 kind of range, and so the artist will have the stand, the stall themselves, and they'll be trying to explain and articulate and sell their own work, and it's not a skill typically that they tend to have. I don't know whether they're teaching it now at art school or indeed whether many of those people would have gone through art school, but you get a great gallerist. Oh, the storytelling that they can do, their ability to curate is incredible.
That's the bit that frustrates me, is that there is always a great story. It's like, why is that banana taped on the wall with duct tape? It's like, how did that come to be? And I think it's unfortunate when people walk into a gallery and they see something like that and they just go, I could have done that. And it's like, I've got a banana on my backpack. I could take that on the wall.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there seems to be this division between people that are like, it should be obvious and implicit on the surface what the value of this is versus the conceptual practice of kind of, you've got to put a lot of work in as a viewer, right, to understand that context. And that's why I say I love the artist talks, because you've got an artist walking through their practice and contextualizing it for you. And often I'll go, well, I don't like the artifact, but I love you and your process and your concepts, and like I love what you do, whether I like the output or not. But yeah, so it's a challenge. I don't know how, like I wish galleries could somehow do a better job of that for people like my parents, who just walk in and go, this leaves me cold, and then they walk out, and I feel like they're missing out on so much of the story. But it's hard.
Maybe there's an app in that, Mark. Maybe that's what someone could build.
Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
there we go. On that note.
Should we whip one of those up in Claude?
Yeah, let's get together and do it. We're getting around a whiteboard. On that note, Mark, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story today. Very grateful to hear what is a very unique and counter-narrative story, and so great that we were able to share that and hopefully opens people's eyes in terms of the non-funding kind of route that's available to them.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you've gotten this far, I reckon you've probably enjoyed it. And there's more available for you in the form of my book, 2 Commas. It's available on my website, joshcomrie.com. I've done an Audible version, which is on amazon.com, and there's a Kindle one kicking around on either of those resources as well. I've had some wonderful, unsolicited feedback from early readers. They describe it as being punchy, clear, helpful, and actionable. What it's not is a guide on how to sell your company. You can go to ChatGPT for that. It's more insightful, experiential-based, and a bit of a blend of psychology, philosophy, and what it takes to build something meaningful and what all that means afterwards. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you grab yourself a copy.